partnering across the ecosystem. My name is Lisa Fuchs, and I am your track chair. Very exciting. As I told everyone yesterday, I kind of got thrown into this, so yesterday was much more bumpy. Today, I think we're good. I work for Kale Communications. Really what we do is through the co-creation communities that we run, we are able to put the brands, your brands, in touch with your customers so that you can truly understand what they need and want, and they can help you to ideate and come up with the next best thing. That's my shameless promotion that I was told to do. So if you have any questions, I'm pretty much here all day. Other than that, I'm now going to introduce our first speaker. The topic is building ecosystems of uncommon partners. And let's give a round of applause for Amanda Manna, co-founder and COO of Uncommon Partners. She's also the former head of Narrative and Partnerships, Lowe's Innovation Labs.
Hi, good morning. Okay, when any big organization is thinking about how to change, we all face some of the same questions. We have to figure out what we're going to work on and what we're not going to work on, and we have to figure out how to convince people inside and outside of the company to work on those things with us. But it's a lot harder than it seems, because for all the talk about the future, there is no one future that we all can work towards building at. But really, it's more like a choose-your-own-adventure novel, where we're all going to be the victim, or hopefully not the victim, of our own choices and our own behaviors. But what happens when most companies start to think about these problems is they focus on technology first, which makes a lot of sense, right? That's what's driving the change. But the problem is that people are not changing nearly as fast as technology. And so what you're seeing here is a composite of all the yearbook photographs over time. Some academics did a study to see how people have changed over time. And what they found is just that we smile a little bit more in pictures than we used to. But we're really pretty much the same. But at the same time, you think about what technology has done over that same span of time, and you start to understand why this change is so difficult for people to adapt to, because here we are still pretty much exactly the same. And that's why you see a lot of companies create innovation labs that don't really produce anything meaningful. They're just throwing technology at the wall to see what sticks, and maybe not starting with a core human behavior problem or thinking about how what they're going to do will affect some kind of meaningful change with customer or employee behavior. Or could you even get your organization to do something differently to get there in the first place, rather than just have an innovation lab out in Silicon Valley where your executives can go take a tour there and everybody says, like, yay, great, we're innovating, and then nothing happens. At the same time, there's all of this competitive pressure, and Lowe's was certainly in this position, right? Lowe's is a Fortune 40 company. It was founded prior to World War II, and it's perpetually number 2 in its category. So there's these immense competitive pressures that tell executives you have to change, even though for the executive who's had a very successful career doing one thing over and over again to get to that point, that is very scary, and they don't know what to do and what that means for their own job and their own future. So what we see is there's all of these human issues, not only with what your customer is going to do with whatever you're building, but with what your organization is going to do to let you even build it in the first place. So in 2013, Lowe's founded the Lowe's Innovation Labs team with the idea that we would try to disrupt ourselves before anyone else did. And there's a lot of companies that have formed similar teams with similar mandates. But we felt like in order to make that actually happen, because we weren't even the first innovation team at Lowe's, we were probably the 3rd or 4th team, but we saw that the same issues kept happening where things kept getting stalled over and over and over again. So we knew that the first thing we needed to help Lowe's do was dream bigger. And the way that we did that was through narrative. So we used science fiction storytelling to work with creative minds outside of our organization to explore probable, possible futures at the convergence of tech and people trends. And then we would make creative artifacts like comic books to actually bring that vision to life and explain it to other people and help them get on board with wanting to build that thing with us. Then we used our stores as living labs. So particularly with retail, there's so much doom and gloom about brick and mortar, but we thought, hey, we have an opportunity that none of the tech companies have, which is millions of people walking through our doors every single week. So we can, as quickly as possible, try to get stuff out in front of them, even if it's ugly and embarrassing, and get their real feedback and figure out what we should do or not, rather than just speculate and leave it in a lab. Then we used applied neuroscience to look at people's unstated reactions to new products and experiences, and looking at how stressed out they were, how bored they were, if they were emotionally engaged, to try to get a sense of, do they like it or not? Because that's not something that we can really articulate to each other very well. And then the final piece of our approach was to work with uncommon partners. So working with people that you wouldn't expect Lowe's to work with to build things that you wouldn't expect Lowe's to build. And there's a number of examples from the startup community that I'm going to share, but sometimes that also meant working with big companies like Google or Microsoft in ways that you would not expect Lowe's to work with them. And sometimes that meant academics or other partners as well. So this is a scene from one of our comic books, and actually let me go back real quick. This is, in the bottom picture here on the right is Kyle, who you might have thought you were going to hear speak today, my business partner. And on the left is Marco Mascaro, and he's the CEO of a company called Fellow Robots that we have worked with extensively for years. And when we started working with Fellow Robots in 2013, we had a comic book that was inspired by this question of how can technology make the store experience easier in the future? Because we know that for home improvement, the average customer may only come in once or twice a year, and they probably don't really know what they're looking for or what they're doing, and so that can be a pretty stressful experience. On the retailer side, from the business standpoint, we know a lot about what people leave the store with, but we have no idea what it was that they came in looking for. And we know that there are many, many languages that walk through our door every day. It's impossible for us to really staff and be able to meet people on their terms. And we know that our employees spend a lot of time with easy questions like, where can I find the hammer? And then they're not spending time figuring out how to help you with your kitchen. So we met Marco about this time, and Fellow Robots was a pretty young company, and they were working on a robot that was a telepresence robot. And it was essentially an iPad on a roving stick, which was kind of interesting, but not really solving any problems that we had, and they were really trying to figure out how to get into retail. And so we sat down and we said, well, here's all these problems that we do have, the things that I just explained to you. And over a 10-month period of time, from January of 2014 until October, when we were putting robots in our stores, we worked with them to totally reposition and redevelop their product so that it was the first autonomous retail service robot. And here is a picture of the robot today that operates in 11 stores in the Bay Area for Lowe's. But we didn't start here. So in 2014, we had to put a robot into our store, which was not a popular topic at headquarters. And there's so many negative connotations that come up when you think about retail employees and automating their job functions. But we really felt like the robot was going to be the employee's best friend. And so we had to find an uncommon partner within our own organization who was willing to take a chance and do that. So way before the robot was ever welcome in a Lowe's, we put it in an Orchard Supply hardware store because they were a little bit outside the core. We had bought them out of bankruptcy. They knew what it was like to stare into the abyss, and they were willing to take some risks that Big Lowe's wasn't really ready to take yet. And so we started with customer service, and the robot would allow you to come in and talk to it and tell it what you were looking for, and it could take you to that place in the store. It mapped the store every night with a LiDAR sensor, like a self-driving car. You could speak to it in multiple languages, and you could even hold up products. Like if you had a screw and you didn't know what it was used for, you could have it scanned, and it would identify what that product was, and you could find another one. And we found that there were some things that people really liked about customer service, particularly the languages, and there were some things that were kind of weird and creeped them out. We had a feature we tried where when you were in aisle and we thought that we could see you were standing there looking for help, the robot would approach you, and we would have someone Skype in essentially on telepresence. But it was, it wasn't something that the customer asked for, and it totally weirded them out. And so there were some times where we went a little bit too far. There was also some human behavior things that we should have anticipated, but we didn't, like 13-year-old boys who want to talk to a robot that repeats what you say. And so pretty quickly we had to scrub the language database. So we learned a lot of things those first couple years, and by 2016, the environment at corporate had totally changed, where our executives were now saying, well, I want a robot, and what can it do for me? So we moved it into Lowe's, and it had a new mission, and it really then was looking at like truly focusing on helping the employee, because one of the things we had discovered was that the ability to use this roving tower of technology could help a lot with inventory scanning. It's a huge issue for retailers around inventory visibility in our stores and really not knowing what's on the shelf at any given point in time when you think you might have something for sale and it may not be there. And there's so many products in our stores and they're so large that an employee could spend their entire shift finding holes and trying to restock things, but it's really a problem that's hard to stay on top of. And so what you're seeing here on the left with this person who's walking down the aisle with the robot is along the side, it's scanning the aisles and using computer vision to identify holes on the shelf. And then we can prioritize those things for employees by the sales opportunity so that they can just go around with a dynamic dashboard like you see here on the right and know exactly what to fill to maintain that sales opportunity and make sure the most popular products were filled. We also had another story that we worked on, and this was inspired by the idea of what if we gave our employees superpowers? And working in a retail environment is really hard on the body, especially if you're a person who's responsible for moving stock around the store. So if you're moving 5-gallon buckets of paint or heavy bags of cement, Lowe's has had to get innovative in the past with our healthcare programs. So we'll totally pay for you to have a joint replacement and to go to the Cleveland Clinic and bring a member of your family. But we thought, hey, what if we never let you get to that place at all? So we worked with Virginia Tech, and they have a world-renowned robotics lab there, to build lightweight employee exosuits that operate a lot like a bow and arrow, and so it would absorb the tension of having to lift something, so it felt essentially weightless. And we found that employees really liked the suit. It effectively did the job of making their jobs easier, and they also, without knowing kind of what our original inspiration was, would repeat back to us that they felt like Superman. So we were pretty excited to see that story come to life. Once again, an uncommon partner. With Virginia Tech, we have an arrangement with them where now maybe Lowe's wants to commercialize that product one day. So it's solving this immediate need of helping employees in the store, but also potentially creating new revenue streams for Lowe's down the road. Additive manufacturing is another space we did a lot of work. And we were trying to help employees and people there get exactly the thing that they needed at the exact time that they needed it. And we have worked with a number of startups in this space. And I would say what I think the best innovation that Lowe's brought forward in the 3D printing or additive space is not necessarily that we were going to get in the business of building new 3D printers or new technology, but we were able to look at the legal standards around what would it mean to offer 3D scanning and printing in stores and holistically pull together a number of different startups to create this service that wasn't available anywhere else, where a customer could come into our store, they could either design custom items for the home, like these, anything from doorknobs and organizers to decor pieces, and print those in almost any material. But they could also bring in their own things that were broken or out of production, and we had a trained 3D technician in the store who would scan that item for you, repair the digital file, and then we could print you a new one and mail it to your house. And one of my favorite use cases was we had a gentleman come in who had a pre-World War II French bicycle, and the metal clip on his bike was broken, so we couldn't ride it. This is clearly an out-of-production item you couldn't get anywhere, that we could scan, and we printed him a new metal clip and mailed it to his house, and his bike was able to be ridden again. And we had people come from neighboring states with no real marketing to try out the service because nothing like this was available anywhere. We found some limitations with the technology, especially with things that you need to print inexpensively in plastic. A lot of times those didn't meet customer expectations for what a finished product should look like. So there's definitely elements of it that we thought were ready and elements of it that we thought had to wait a little bit until the technology could catch up. But in terms of understanding what the customer wanted and how they might use it, we made a lot of ground. And this was actually a partnership with a company called Desktop Metal. So one of the things that we identified when we were at this stage was really that metal was the piece that was meeting that customer expectation, but it's still very expensive and difficult to produce. But Desktop Metal is, as their name might suggest, doing desktop 3D printing in metal. And that was really something that we had flagged and that we were looking for to come along. And so when we met these guys, we immediately wanted to partner with them and think about how we could make custom tools for professionals or use cases like the French bicycle that I mentioned. And so that was another partnership. But with this service that was in our Manhattan stores, we actually pulled together 4 or 5 different startups working on different problems within the 3D printing and scanning space, how to host models, how to make them available online, how to offer customization, and brought all of that together for the first time in one holistic service. We also have a very rich partnership with a company called Made in Space. And they developed the first 3D printer that was available to print in zero-G environments. And their whole mission is to make it possible for people to manufacture things off-planet, which we'll have to do if there ever is a future in space, because obviously you can't keep sending everything up on a rocket ship forever. And so we worked with them to put the first store in space. So this is actually currently on the International Space Station being used to print tools for astronauts. And the first commercial tool produced off-planet was a Lowe's cobalt wrench, specially modified to clip onto astronaut suits. And we've continued to look for other things there. Like one thing that we were interested in printing was they do a lot of, they have ear swabs they send up to do medical tests on the astronauts. And they're just plastic things that get sent up over and over again. Those types of little plastic things we thought would be the perfect kind of use case to build on the space station rather than send up in a rocket. Thank you. So sometimes we found the most uncommon partner could even be Lowe's ourselves, and figuring out when do we want to partner and when do we want to build. So this is a scene from our first ever comic book. This is a couple who's standing in their old kitchen wearing a heads-up display and able to see their new kitchen overlaid on top of it, which now you've probably seen a lot of examples of people doing things like this, but this comic was produced in 2012 prior to the Oculus Rift Kickstarter, and really at the time nobody was talking about these technologies the way they are today. So we passed these comic books out to our executive team, which, Lowe's is probably exactly what you're imagining. It's a pretty conservative hardware store. Nobody's ever passed out a comic book in a meeting before. And they all kind of laughed. But then once they got through the comic book, this kind of murmur goes through the room where they're all saying like, oh crap, if we don't build this, somebody will. So yeah, why not? Let's take a shot. Like, why not us? And so we see a lot of times these big companies are scared of the proverbial 2 guys in a garage, which yes, you should be to some extent, but at the same time, you have the resources and the channel and the customer base. Like, you have so many opportunities if you can get your organization to move. And so we really quickly did, and we put this in our stores. This was the first hollow room is what we called it. It was super crude, but we allowed you to view an augmented reality through an iPad. You could walk around a big 30 by 30 square box in the store that had markings on the wall to orient the technology, and you could design a bathroom. And so a couple important things that came from this very first test, which we built and put up in about 3 months. First of all, we figured out that, yes, people like it. It was helping them feel more confident about taking on a project because they could visualize the end result. And that fear and that apathy, Lowe's had actually calculated to be about a $70 billion problem of projects that never got started because people were afraid. And so if we could help them get over that hump, this was a huge business opportunity. The second thing that we were able to uncover is when you think about the comic and you have to reverse engineer it to say, what do we do to make it real? One of the things we started thinking about was 3D content and how do we convert our product catalog into 3D models. And once again, at this time, there were not a lot of options. And so we really started to look around and figure out, can we partner with someone to do this, or is this something that we should do ourselves? And we went over about 5 or 6 different discrete experiences, testing everything from that iPad solution to Google Cardboard, Oculus Rift, Microsoft HoloLens, pretty much any tool that was out there, and consistently got smarter about the things that people liked and they didn't like. And one of the main ways we did that was through the neuroscience testing. So these are the 4 measures that we would use, and we'd really be looking at cognitive load, which is, are you stressed or are you bored, your motivation to complete the experience, your emotional engagement, and then wearing eye tracking goggles to see exactly where you're looking in the scene. And this is the kind of read you might get out of that data. But what we saw over time is that this was our benchmark. So this was the physical store vignette. And where you want to be for cognitive load is in this middle section here, where you're not bored, you're engaged, but you're not overloaded. So even just standing at the physical vignette is already overwhelming people, because a lot of times these vignettes are old. They may be 10 years old, what you're seeing in the store, so it's not in style, and you're being asked to kind of visualize your new project around something that's old. And also, there's just little things like people try to turn on the water faucets even though they know they aren't real, and then that creates a bad experience. So we had a lot of room to improve just from the beginning. This is a conglomerated score for all of the headset-based tools that we looked at, and we saw that there was a significant improvement, but it was still kind of stressful for people. And if you've ever tried on a VR headset or watched other people do this, they all have the same reaction. Everybody takes it off and says, wow, that's cool, but we noticed that then they would put it down and they'd be kind of like walking away. Like, that's cool, but it's not for me. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. People are worried about hygiene. You're in a store environment where you're feeling a little uncomfortable because you can't see what's around you. It's hard to collaborate in that way, the way that people wanted to. And where we really started to see hitting the sweet spot of cognitive interest was when we got to augmented reality on a smartphone. And we were one of the early partners for Google's Tango team, which all of that technology has all been rolled into the AR Core platform now, if you're familiar with that on Android. But back to Uncommon Partners, we actually had our engineering team pushing Google's engineering team to try new things based on what we were learning. And I don't think that that's something that Google expected, or any of our competition as well, that we would be hand-in-hand developing new tech with Google. So we built a number of experiences on that platform. Some were in home. So these are the Lowe's Envisioned and separately a Lowe's Measured app that you can download today on AR Core and AR Kit. And that allows you to do things like measure a space in your home, and then we'll show you only product that fits that space, and then you can view it in augmented reality. Or you can just do simple measurements of anything you want on your phone. And we think that the phone is obviously a form factor that people are comfortable with now, but there's also something to the fact that when you get overwhelmed and your brain gets overheated, you sort of naturally put it down without even thinking about it, and then you can pick it back up and get back into the experience at a rate that you're comfortable with. We did in-store wayfinding, so you could follow digital breadcrumb trails through the store, and then when you got to the product, you could see overlaid review information and additional product background. And ultimately, we created our own 3D scanning team and department that's now being rolled out to support Lowe's and convert our entire product catalog, but also potentially serve other businesses. And so using photogrammetry and other tools, we were able to build some of the most realistic 3D content that was available today that had applications even just in web browsers. So when we add 3D content next to product photos or videos on a product page online, we saw that conversion rate really soar, because you can even zoom inside of this stool. You can really see texture and other details in greater detail than you ever could before. So while we did see that VR could be a little bit overwhelming for design, we saw that immersive quality made it great for learning. And so we started to think about DIY skills. And they are declining, and that's a problem for our customers as well as our employees. And so we created an experience called Holoroom How-To, where you could, in VR, learn how to tile a shower. So we used the HTC Vive, so you had some rudimentary hand control ability. And you went through all of the steps to learn the project. When we compared that against YouTube videos, which is the next best thing, we saw a 40% increase in learning the steps, which would be that recall being the first step of learning, as compared to just going through the YouTube video. And surprisingly, we saw that was true for DIY novices as well as experts. So we really saw a lot of promise there, and the next version of that was actually Holoroom Red Vest, and we're using that specifically as an employee training tool to help them use things like the blind cutting machine in the store, something we know is kind of anxiety-inducing for a lot of associates. And all of this ladders up to some great success for Lowe's. So the company that you would not have expected in 2013 to be part of any significant innovation conversation. Earlier this year, we were named Most Innovative Company in AR and VR in any category by Fast Company on their Most Innovative Companies list. And on Fortune's Most Admired Companies list, we were the #1 company in innovation in our category of specialty retail. So all that to say, big companies can do it too, and it's just a matter of finding the motivation internally to get started and going out there and really trying these things and having a vision of what you're trying to build. And really tying it back to that change in behavior, which was always our real objective. So that said,